I made a parody school newspaper that made one girl hate me so much, I had to use the nickname I'd been saving. In high school there was this girl named Martina. I never met her, never talked to her, but I discovered one day that she hated me. I had no idea why at first. It all started during my junior year at Roosevelt High. I was that kid who always sat in the back of the class, not because I was a troublemaker, but because I found it gave me the perfect vantage point to observe the daily comedy show that was high school life. My best friends, Danny and Steve, shared my somewhat sardonic view of our educational institution. We spent most of our lunch breaks dissecting the absurdity of school politics and the various cliques that roamed the halls like their own little fiefdoms. The school newspaper, the Roosevelt Review, was supposed to be the voice of the student body. Instead, it had become this sanitized weekly collection of what felt like press releases from the administration. Every issue followed the same formula: front page dedicated to whatever groundbreaking initiative Principal Thompson was pushing that week, second page filled with heavily edited student council announcements, sports section that only covered our winning games, which were few and far between, and the rest padded with cookie-cutter advice columns and student spotlights that mysteriously always featured members of the newspaper staff or their friends. After some investigation, it turned out she hated me because I had made my own fake edition of the school newspaper. I was a big fan of the National Lampoon, so of course I parodied my school newspaper. Martina was the editor of the school paper. She hated me because everyone read my parody paper, and hardly anyone ever read the actual school newspaper. The idea for the parody came to me during one particularly mind-numbing assembly where Martina and her crew were presenting their latest issue. They were proudly announcing their new student voice section, which turned out to be just another place for the same 10 people to talk about their achievements. Danny leaned over and whispered, "Man, I bet even their parents don't read this stuff." That's when the light bulb went off. I spent the next week meticulously studying the layout and style of the Roosevelt Review. Mrs. Peterson, the computer lab supervisor, never questioned why I was spending so much time after school working on a special project. She was just happy to see a student actually using the publishing software the school had spent a fortune on. The parody took shape as the Roosevelt Review, just different enough to avoid immediate legal trouble, but similar enough to be instantly recognizable. I crafted stories that actually reflected student life, an exposé on the mysterious contents of Tuesday's Mystery Meat Lunch, a detailed analysis of Mr. Wagner's toupee and its various positions throughout the day, and an in-depth investigation into why the girls' bathroom on the second floor was perpetually under maintenance. Spoiler, it was the unofficial smoker's lounge. Mostly because the school newspaper was boring AF and heavily sanitized by the administration, so it was just dull and irrelevant to student life. My parody was funny, I made fun of the teachers no one liked, and went through the school like wildfire. Apparently people would keep coming up to her and asking why the real paper can't be as fun as my parody, and suggesting that she get me on as a writer on her paper. One of my favorite pieces was about Mr. Kincaid, the chemistry teacher who had a habit of dramatically overreacting to the slightest lab safety violation. I wrote a mock safety guide that included gems like in case of a dropped pencil, evacuate the building immediately and contact hazmat, and if you sneeze within 50 feet of the chemical storage room, please update your will accordingly. Students who'd suffered through his panic attacks over spilled water couldn't stop laughing. The article about Ms. Roberts, the overly enthusiastic English teacher who related everything to Shakespeare, was another hit. I wrote a piece analyzing the cafeteria menu through a Shakespearean lens. To eat, or not to eat, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous meatloaf. Naturally, being high school, the paper was highly clique-y, and only friends of those in charge got on. The newspaper office was like a small kingdom, ruled by Martina and her inner circle, Jessica Walsh, the fashion columnist who'd never been seen wearing the same designer outfit twice, Brian Thompson, yes, the principal's son, who covered sports despite never having played any, and Amanda Chen, no relation to my friend Steve, who wrote the advice column despite being notoriously bad at following her own advice. To be fair, I didn't intend it to be read by the entire school. I had only made 3 copies to hand out to my closest friends, but they made copies and give them out, and those people made copies, etc. I handed out 3 copies before first class, and after that class was over I was walking down the hall and noticing that a lot of people were standing around, reading something, and laughing. To my surprise, horror and delight, it turned out they were reading my paper. The copies I'd given to Danny and Steve had somehow multiplied like rabbits. Tracy Wong, who worked in the library and had access to the photocopier, had apparently been running off copies nonstop since first period. By lunch, I spotted members of the football team reading it in the cafeteria, drama kids passing it around during rehearsal, and even saw Mr. Wagner himself staring at it with a mixture of amusement and concern. while unconsciously adjusting his toupee. The real chaos started when someone slipped a copy under the door of the teacher's lounge. Mrs. Gonzalez, the Spanish teacher who had a legendary sense of humor, apparently read my article about the school's enhanced language lab, which consisted of one ancient tape player and a collection of scratched cassettes, out loud to the other teachers. Some laughed, some fumed, and Principal Thompson reportedly turned several interesting shades of purple. I ended up getting suspended for 3 days for writing my parody, because I made fun of teachers and was stupid enough to have my name on it as the editor. Vice Principal Stern called me into his office during 6th period. He was trying to maintain his stern expression, pun intended, but I could swear I saw him fighting back a smile when he referenced my article about the school's new security system, which was just elderly Mr. Jenkins falling asleep in his chair by the front entrance. My parents were called in, of course. Dad tried to look disappointed but later told me he thought it was hilarious and reminded him of his own high school days. Mom was more concerned about the suspension affecting my college applications, but even she had to admit that my writing showed creative potential. The 3 days of suspension weren't too bad. I spent them helping out at my uncle's comic book store, which was way more entertaining than school anyway. He even let me reorganize the National Lampoon section, considering me a fellow satirist in training. But even after my suspension, Martina Pap kept bad-mouthing me around the school. I kept hearing people spreading false rumors about me started by Martina. She even started insulting me when we'd pass at random in the halls. The rumors ranged from the ridiculous, that I was secretly working for a rival school's newspaper, to the malicious, that I'd hacked into the school's computer system to steal the newspaper's layout. Her campaign against me took on almost comic proportions. When I wrote for the school's literary magazine, which was separate from the newspaper, Martina tried to get my submission rejected by claiming I had plagiarized it. Fortunately, Mrs. O'Connor, the faculty advisor, knew better and published my short story anyway. It was about a dystopian school where students were only allowed to smile between 2:15 and 2:30 p.m. on alternate Thursdays. Martina's friends joined in on the harassment. Jessica Walsh started a rumor that I only wore black t-shirts because I was part of an underground anarchist newspaper movement. I actually just liked black t-shirts and was too lazy to coordinate outfits. Brian Thompson would accidentally bump into me in the halls, spilling whatever he was carrying. Amanda Chen wrote a thinly veiled advice column response about dealing with attention-seeking troublemakers who undermine school unity. The situation reached peak absurdity when Martina convinced the student council to propose a new rule requiring all unofficial student publications to be pre-approved by the newspaper staff. Even Principal Thompson thought that was going too far and quietly shelved the proposal. Thing that Martina Pap didn't know was that I had been sitting on a particularly nasty nickname for her. I'm pretty good at coming up with nicknames, but I had never shared the one I had for her with anyone, because I was pretty sure it would stick, and it wasn't a nice nickname. Prior to her anger issues I had no reason to use it. That nickname was Martina Pap Smear. Not very clever, but exactly the kind of thing that would click in the minds of us juvenile teenagers. But, seeing since Martina liked yelling insults, I thought what the hell. The next time she randomly insulted me in the halls, I just said, "Thanks, Martina Pap Smear." The nickname spread through the school faster than my parody paper had. By the end of the day, I heard it whispered in the hallways, scratched into desk corners, and even saw it written in tiny letters on the bathroom wall. Martina's face turned red every time she heard it, which only encouraged people to use it more. Her newspaper crew tried to defend her by starting a campaign against bullying through nicknames, which might have worked if they hadn't spent the previous month spreading rumors about me. The irony was lost on them, but not on the rest of the student body. As a bit of bonus petty revenge for my suspension, several weeks later I made another parody paper, this time without my name on it. I printed up 100 copies and went to school early in the morning, hours before first class started, and spread them all around. Again the paper went viral, but this time when the vice principal called me to his office I claimed it was a copycat paper and nothing to do with me, so no suspension the second time around. This second edition was even more popular than the first. I'd had time to really polish my writing and included some deeper cuts, like an architectural review of the boys' locker room graffiti and a scientific study on the correlation between cafeteria food color and subsequent nurses' office visits. The mystery of who wrote it drove Martina crazy. She and her team spent weeks trying to analyze the writing style to prove it was me. They even created a literary analysis task force, which honestly would have made a great article for my next parody. They brought their evidence to Vice Principal Stern, but without my name on the paper, there wasn't much he could do. Besides, I'm pretty sure he was one of the people who had been secretly enjoying the parodies. The whole experience taught me a lot about the power of humor and the weird dynamics of high school politics. By the time graduation rolled around, the tension had mostly died down. Martina was heading off to journalism school. Ironically, my parodies had helped her pad her college applications with stories about managing crisis communication and addressing unauthorized competition, and I had been accepted to study creative writing. At graduation, as we were all milling around in our caps and gowns, Martina actually approached me. For a moment I thought she was going to start another argument, but instead she said, "You know, you really should have joined the paper. We could have used someone who could actually make people want to read it." Then she walked away before I could respond. The last I heard, she's working as an editor at a major newspaper. Sometimes I wonder if she ever thinks about those high school days and laughs about it. As for me, well, I still keep a copy of both parody issues in my desk drawer. They remind me that sometimes the best stories are the ones that weren't supposed to be told in the first place. The nickname Pap Smear apparently lived on at Roosevelt High for a few years after we graduated. New students didn't even know where it came from, but somehow it had become part of the school's folklore. I heard that the administration eventually had to ban the term officially, which probably only made it more popular. Danny and Steve both went to different colleges, but whenever we get together, someone inevitably brings up the Roosevelt Review. Steve still has his original copy of the first issue, now yellow with age and covered in coffee stains. Danny claims he lost his copy, but I'm pretty sure he sold it to a freshman for $20 during our senior year. Looking back, I probably should thank Martina. If she hadn't made such a big deal about my parody, it might have just been another forgotten high school prank. Instead, it became the thing that made me realize I wanted to write for a living. Not bad for 3 days suspension and a semester of drama. Though I have to admit, I still can't look at a school newspaper without getting the urge to write a parody version.